Welcome back to the Practice Pulse, where we spotlight the leaders, systems, and innovations shaping the future of behavioral health and private practice. I'm your host, Nancy Margrit, founder of OptimaPro AI, a company that's focused on helping practices scale sustainably, increase lifetime value, and build smart infrastructure while retaining the human touch. Today, I'm joined by Natasha Davalt, Executive Director of Mental Health Peak in New Jersey. It's a growing behavioral health organization that has expanded quickly with an 11-fold increase in just 4 years, while maintaining a deeply mission-driven, community-centered culture. Natasha, I'm so glad that you're here to talk with us today. If you don't mind, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to dedicate your career to mental health, particularly stepping into that leadership and program management role?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So it's hard to say out loud sometimes, but I've been doing this a little over 20 years. It feels like just yesterday, as many say. But I was a child of the system, as many would recall. My father was incarcerated. My mother used a lot of social services. 80s and 90s, there weren't a lot of lights put on kind of kids with trauma histories and, growing up in not the best neighborhoods, and it was kind of hush hush. So thank God we've come full circle where now there's a little bit more attention on the benefit of mental health and supports for community members that are facing adversity. And I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. So when it came to being exposed to sin and not the best behaviors and, people that were unwell, I was kind of exposed pretty early. And my family and my immediate community were, affected by it on a daily basis, from gambling addiction, again, to drug and alcohol culture, all of it. So it definitely was something that I wouldn't change now, but it certainly contributed. And growing up where I did and having the family dynamics that I did, there were a lot of choices. You could either go into hotel management like everyone else and kind of stay in that cycle, not that there's anything wrong with that, or you can kind of combat the ramifications of those cycles. And so I was kind of the black sheep in my family. I wanted to help people and not make money. And that really kind of perplexed my mom. So I went into the law enforcement realm again, because my father was incarcerated and all the stigmas that came with that. I wanted to save the world. And so I thought, what's the opposite of Las Vegas, which is nowhere, Pennsylvania? And so I moved out east when I was 18, all by myself, and did a dual track in college, which was a bachelor's in criminology and also to enter into law enforcement, specifically to be a state trooper. So at that point, again, I wanted to save the world. I wanted to, come full circle. And what I realized when I was in law enforcement was that it was very kind of one-sided, and, you get the bad guys off the streets and then rinse and repeat, which is noble work. But where I was kind of, conflicted was that I was talking to a lot of the people we were getting off the streets, and I wanted to know their story, and I wanted to know how they ended up in the drunk tank and all of these things. And I remember my superiors were saying, why don't you just go be a therapist? You're going to ask all these questions and know their story. So I said, you know what? That's a pretty good idea. And I didn't shift things completely. I still earned my bachelor's degree in criminology, pre-law, but I wanted to use that to work with that particular population to start. So after I graduated, I went to Drexel University in Philadelphia, and again, the rest is history. Since then, I worked with, again, incarcerated parents, their children, their families. I directed a nonprofit for ex-offenders, so a lot of folks that were just serving maybe minimal sentences on the county level, but they wanted to reunite with their families. Again, working with kids that are in the foster care system because their parents were incarcerated. And I was always, kind of the nerd that was president of student council and Key Club. And so I kind of was always built to lead, maybe not necessarily by choice, because again, having a single mom and living in the city and, kind of having to fend for myself, it was a skill set that kind of organically built on its own. And thank God I used it in the right way. And always just kind of found myself in positions where people were like, well, why don't you just take the lead, Natasha? Or you've got this. And perhaps maybe taken advantage of in that sense, but also trying to kind of prove myself too. So leadership and kind of fighting the good fight kind of always was a parallel in my career and in even academia. So here we are 20 years later and having worked under many umbrellas, but always kind of in a director supervisorial role, which was really important to me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us. It's always interesting to hear what led people to do the things that they're doing in life and the value that they're bringing. And sometimes those stories are difficult to hear and difficult to tell. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Tell us a little bit about Mental Health Peak and how it started and then where it is now. Tell us what makes it unique. You shared some stuff on our intro call that really I was like, that's a really cool system they have set up in there. So tell us a little bit about your system that's set up where you have a progression. So it's like, okay, we can graduate and then we can come back and also like teach other people. It's a nice little cycle that encourages the people that, graduate through your program to then come back and help as well. So could you tell us just a little bit about that?
Sure. It's very identity focused. So again, a lot of programs, God love them, but they kind of focus on that diagnosis or this adversity. And what we do is we approach the person as a whole. We understand that, when we go into treatment or try to acknowledge the fact that we have unmanageable mental health symptoms or an addiction that has kind of taken over our lives, those are a lot of slices of the pie that we're trying to kind of own and really take in the fact that there is no cure for that. It's just maintenance. So when we first opened a co-occurring adult IOP and partial hospitalization program. And when we started noticing that there were a lot of folks that were graduating from our program, maintaining long-term sobriety, we were kind of referring them out to all of our, colleagues and partners that were in private practices, and it kind of scattered. And that's when we realized that an alumni network was absolutely vital. What we really appreciate about the alumni network is it allows them to not only stay in as a community for social events, but also we've had alumni come back and teach, if they were a banker in one life, they come back and teach a budgeting class. So it kind of keeps that system alive. And, by default, it allows for motivation for our current clients to go, wait, I can do that too, which we really appreciate. So we try to keep it in the family. But then again, that identity piece is, wow, I can stand in front of peers when I used to be on the other side of that table and tell them that we do recover and we do heal as long as we accept the fact that this is part of our identity. And so we had a very small, again, co-occurring dual diagnosis census. And then when we realized that we could kind of still keep it in the family, we opened a location in the same medical complex that was primary mental health. And what that allowed for was a very delicate, what we say a delicate dance, which is not necessarily enabling them or keeping them institutionalized, but allowing them to own this part of their identity, achieve long-term sobriety and then move down the street and then own that part of their identity, which is, let's say an acute anxiety disorder, a bipolar, whatever they were in essence self-medicating, at least most of them for so long. So it allows for new topics and approaches and even some staffing to be introduced to their treatment plan, but it's not this visceral change that can completely knock them off course. It allows their families to have a safe place to come back to, whether we're doing a workshop or family therapy. They know us already. And it helps them to trust the process a little bit more because when they do eventually graduate, we can say, listen, this is your meeting schedule. These are the support groups you're going to and your one-on-one counselor. And we wouldn't refer you if we didn't trust that they were going to hold space for you just as much as we did. And again, it makes it a little less overwhelming. So what we realized was when people felt safe and they felt like they were going to be able to change, but in small doses, that really allowed us to maintain a population and relationships with other programs that made them feel safe referring people to us. You're going to protect our people, which is great. And you're not going to just throw them on the streets and say, well, insurance said this and your auth is up. We don't operate like that. It's just not who we are as people. The owners and the staff that we started with all came from agencies that were not the healthiest. We did good work, but just not in the best places. At least we didn't know it at the time. So
Right.
we bring that mentality into the work we do too, is that we're never going to go backwards. We're not going to compromise our integrity. We're not going to just cut off care for billing purposes. We can't sleep at night knowing that. So we are bleeding hearts, but within reason. And that's kind of the foundation that we built on. So we've noticed that that's definitely contributed to why we've maintained steady growth so far.
That's wonderful. I think especially in the space that you're in, you really have to maintain that bleeding heart. You have to have that heartfelt purpose and passion in order to help people through the process because it's not a one shot deal. It's an ongoing process. And it's wonderful that you take them, A to Z slowly and you guide them along the way and you create consistency with the people that they're working with and showing them, this is what Z looks like with the alumni program. So I think that's just a wonderful system that you have. So I'm glad you explained that for our listeners. Let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges in scaling because you did scale pretty quickly for a mental health facility. So from your perspective as the executive director, what are some of the most significant challenges that mental health organizations and practitioners owners face today as they're scaling, and then keeping their impact and making sure that they're continuing to reach more people, but also reach people in the right way?
Yeah. I think the key to that is maintaining humility, remembering where we came from. Unfortunately, and I see this pattern, you could write a dissertation on it with a lot of agencies where God love the fact that they're all in recovery from something and they're kind of using their own stories. But what I've noticed is that sometimes, at the end of the day, we're addicts and we're suffering with mental health, and you could sprinkle on success and stability on top of that, but there sometimes can be a turnaround where we forget where we came from and we forget that we were once in those seats. And so when that happens, there's a lot of check-ins like, guys, let's not get too big too soon. Let's remember our roots. And if we feel like we're getting too big for our bridges because we're trying to keep up with the industry, we need to check in with ourselves and say, listen, what are we willing to compromise to win the race? And what I appreciate about our team and our program is that if we ever get a little itchy, because we are human beings, unfortunately, this is a recession-proof industry. I mean, there's plenty of clients to go around. And in order to kind of stick out or to reach a higher audience, we have to be very careful with our conversations about what that looks like. And so what I take pride in is not necessarily going for the biggest and the best. Let's get all of these modalities and these types of providers and, basically bankrupt ourselves to kind of stick out where we can do things more in-house. What I mean by that is start kind of surveying the talent you have from within. When you hire counselors and say, okay, they have a degree in psychology and, it's kind of this standard, resume, which is great, and they do great work, but what do they love to do? And if we have a counselor who's like, well, actually, I do yoga on the weekends. Okay, then this is what we're going to do. We're going to support further training and education for you if you want to get, let's say, for example, a certification in somatic yoga. And so now they're bringing in something that they were already doing that they love. And we're not, again, bankrupting ourselves trying to kind of, outsource all of these entities when we have all of this talent from within. And so what we've noticed is when we do even intern interviews, right? A lot of interns say, oh, well, my major is business. Okay. And what made you want to shift? Because of course that's something that's close to my heart. Right. And it's like, well, I was kind of feeling like I was getting sucked in by kind of corporate America. Okay. Well, now you're getting a degree in psychology or sociology, and how are you going to incorporate that in what you do? And so then we start exploring group topics that allow our business professionals who are coming in and struggling to say, wait, you once upon a time? Yeah, me too. So it just allows for this diversity in our programming. Again, it allows for the budget to not be impacted highly because you get to know your staff as people rather than just clinicians. And when you start to tap into the talents from within and then foster that, right there, you've tripled your staffing, by design, just by getting to know them as people and within their comfort level, right? So it's really understanding that I've seen, again, a lot of these programs just kind of invest a lot of money and time into people they don't really know or systems they're not really familiar with because they've seen it in other programs. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, why don't we tap into what we already have? And what we've noticed is that continues to promote the humility amongst our team and in our culture. And to be frank, I love the fact that it kind of boosts the self-esteem of our clinicians who, at times with burnout rates, if they don't have to be a clinician during this group, they can just be someone who loves meditation, or they can be someone who loves ceramic art. It's a win-win. Right. So now we don't have to worry about, you don't have to be this licensed, formally trained art therapist. You're just connecting with people over, pottery. Right. So again, it kind of just creates this kind of communal, homegrown feeling that when people walk into our building, they don't feel overly intimidated. They don't feel like they have to fit into a box. And, we have diverse programming. They can go to this group or this group, it sure is kind of lifted. There's still accountability and structure, but it's not as visceral as some of these programs that, again, invest a lot of money and time and go, but you have to do this. We spend a lot of money on it. Right. And
Right.
we try to kind of combat that overall vibe in our agency, which I can appreciate. I hope that answers the question.
That was a beautiful answer. And I think any CEO or human resources person that is listening right now, that's an extremely dynamic strategy. And I'm here for it. To be able to sit down and even an interview and understand, ask those questions. First of all, you're already creating rapport with the interviewee by showing interest in what their interests are. But then being able to say, hey, we can give you this space where you can even explore and expand beyond that and learn more about what you're passionate about and share it with others. It's genius to bring that in, and you're sharing it with your groups in different ways. I think that's a phenomenal strategy. I commend you for I think that was the biggest golden nugget I've gotten so far. So that's
I appreciate
awesome.
that.
Yeah, it's great because when people when they're working at a place are happier when they're, doing things that they love, because it can be difficult when you're working in the mental health space and or social work. There's an extreme burnout capacity for that. But when you jump in and you're like, hey, I can also provide some, yoga, and then I get to do that because I enjoy that, is amazing. That is a great strategy. Okay, let's talk a little bit about continuity and integration. So, one thing that stood out for me is your integrated care model. So, allowing the patients to transition from the dual diagnosis addiction treatment into a long-term mental health program within the same ecosystem, which is a beautiful way to set that up. Why do you feel like this continuity is so powerful? And then how has that impacted your retention as well as your outcomes?
Great question. So again, going back to the identity piece is that when people walk through our doors, especially if they're battling with any type of addiction, behavioral addiction, shopping, eating, all of that, in addition to kind of the more traditional addictions, that alone, there's a level of surrendering that comes with that. I realize I can't fight this anymore. I realize it's compromised my life. And I'm not quite sure of the origin or what contributed to it getting this bad. Or, I need to mend family relationships. I need to get my job back, my career, or whatever it might be. And so again, coming in with that notion to say, so now I need to remove this variable. I need to remove this substance, this vice. And then everything will be fine, which is, 90% of what people think when they walk into treatment. And it's a great step. It's about 2% of the whole thing, though, right? So we work as a treatment team. We have case management. We have a nurse practitioner. We have an RN. So we incorporate the model of most IOPs and partial programs, which is a treatment team approach, where it's all in-house. So if you're not meeting with your counselor one-on-one, you're meeting with the family therapist with your spouse. And then the next day, you're meeting with your medical provider about medication options, perhaps even medication options that will cure cravings. Medically assisted treatment is what we call that. And then group therapy. So all of it, again, is this dynamic kind of wheel that they're in throughout the week. And then by let's say a few months down the line, they've gotten to a place where they've maintained sobriety, they know how to manage their symptoms, adopted better coping mechanisms. And then again, with the introduction of medication or further processing, they realize, so this entire time I was trying to disguise my childhood trauma, or I didn't realize that these symptoms equated to bipolar disorder. And so now they're wearing this whole heavier cloak that they walked in with. It was hard enough to say I'm an addict of this, and I'm in recovery from this. And now I'm diagnosed with this, if not this and that, right? So we validate that, we comfort them through that, and we recognize that this cloak is going to have many patches, right? It is up to you how you present and how you choose to share that information. We believe in the power of the narrative. A lot of times people who are vulnerable and kind of adopting parts of their identity, they feel like they have to broadcast it, especially if there's shame and guilt behind it. I did all this harm. Here you go. I'm this horrible person. Do with it what you will, right? And we do the complete opposite of not only you did bad things, you made bad choices, but how brave is it to wear this cloak and say, but it's not going anywhere. And because I wear this cloak, I need to wear it with pride, and I need to wear it with humility, and I need to wear it amongst my family and the people that I did harm, reassure them that they're going to be safe because I'm choosing to address it. So what we do is we say, okay, so now you've adopted this identity, you understand what you need to maintain health regarding this identity, but this goes deeper. And 9 times out of 10, it is a mental health diagnosis. And so when, again, the vice is removed, they know to manage it. They know to manage their cravings and their urges. They accept the fact that what brings the cravings and urges. I get activated in small spaces. I get activated by yelling. I didn't realize that this was associated to a traumatic job I once had or relationship, whatever it might be. And so at that point, perhaps medications are then introduced to address the mental health symptoms, and other modalities and other types of therapy approaches to address, family discord, whatever it might be. So overall, it's really just, again, rooted in that identity of these are parts of who I am, but amongst that, I'm a mom, I'm a spouse, I'm a professional. And so that's when we sprinkle in, you'll see a lot of programs that say, if alcohol is your vice, go to AA and you'll be good. Well, what if I don't have a spiritual grounding, right? And which is what AA is kind of based in, which is great. But if it doesn't suit everyone, that's fine. What are my options? Okay, well, what if I don't want to go to a support group that has anything to do with my addiction? I'd rather keep that more person-centered in my therapy. Okay, well, how about a divorce support group, a single mom support group, all of these other arenas that allow you to kind of embrace all the parts. And so that's a big piece of what we do is we make sure that they understand that those parts go everywhere with you. And that there are days where you're going to be more of a mom than anything and more of a professional and more of an alcoholic. And, the spotlight is going to kind of shift, if not hour by hour, if not day by day. So knowing that you're prepared to kind of take on all the roles at, any given time and feel safe in that and feel secure in that. I mean, that's the majority of the battles we face every day.
100%. Very well said. Um, Yeah, that's beautiful how you're helping people in so many different ways and so many different facets of their lives because we are complex human beings and our struggles are complex because of it. So to be able to take that and dive deep into some of those different individual concerns is really powerful. You talked a little bit about that part of the process. That leads me a little bit to the alumni engagement that you've built. You have, I know, quarterly events, ongoing connection, community touch points, many practices. Why is it important, do you feel, to build that layer of continued engagement? And do you see that community element as part of your growth strategy, even if it wasn't designed that way initially? I know your outcome originally is probably just to help people, but do you see that as part of what kind of contributed to your growth?
Absolutely. So it did kind of organically develop. I mean, I know again from my background, fostering those relationships after they leave, whether it be, via Zoom meetings or whatever, just keeping that intact. And we do a very standard system, so depending on their type of discharge, I mean, what we always hope for is that they understand that even if they didn't graduate successfully, if they switched insurances and it's more logistical, or unfortunately, if they relapsed, we are still going to call you. And, whether that's every 3 months or every 3 weeks, depending on what you're going through, we keep those lines of communication open. And what we've noticed, again, we've had alumni come back and, volunteer and act as speakers, especially on the recovery side of things. But on the other end, of course, presenting their interests. And we did, for example, like a life skills talent show. And it's just, I'm really good at loading the dishwasher within 5 seconds. All right. So they'll come in and say, this is a life skill that I adopted and I want you guys to know it, And so they're kind of just giving their little nuggets of this is what healing and recovery did for me. But what I love the most and what really kind of inspired me is when we made some of these calls, what we recognized was, for example, we've had 2 case managers that were former patients of ours, and they just wanted to leave the roles that they were in because the gifts of sobriety is your eyes kind of open to maybe really stressful professions that you're in. And I can't go back to working in a casino or working back in direct care. And so what we love about that is they've come back and we call them wounded healers. And, now they work for us full time. They bring their stories in every day. And it's kind of more of a consistent, direct approach of this is what we're doing. And this is who, not in a braggadocious way, but kind of in a way where you too can do this type of work. And if you go to any inpatient or outpatient practice that's especially co-occurring and you survey all of the staff there and you ask, did you all go to career day in third grade and say, I want to be a therapist? Probably not, right? I wanted to be a recovery coach. No, you wanted to be an astronaut, a teacher. But what ends up happening is when, addiction and mental health take over, a lot of times these wonderful teachers and astronauts have to leave those professions or can't go back to it. And what they find is, where can I use this in other areas? And that's what I love about our system is that if you were to survey our staff right now, none of us plan to go into this. Again, law enforcement, right? But it found us. And so what we do with our alumni network is to ask them to be found. And what we appreciate is when they come back to us and go, well, I surrendered and I let myself be found. And are you hiring? So we, again, have full-time staff. We're opening another location up north in a couple of months. And we have a graduate intern who was a former patient of ours who went from law school and immediately dropped out of law school, withdrew, and then got into a master's program for social work and emailed us and said, my life's been changed. I want to give back. And so she'll be starting as our intern in the fall as well. So we just make sure, again, within reason, to kind of prevent some of that dual relationship enmeshment. But as enough time and sobriety has passed, a lot of our graduates end up working in sober living homes as behavioral technicians. So again, that alumni network, if we don't keep that roster going and we don't keep calling them, now we do have some that say, don't ever call me again. I'm not ready. That's fine. We accept it. But we always keep the lines of communication open. And when we see them show up at the hibachi restaurant for the lunch outing that we're having, or again, their resume lands on my desk because they've been graduated over a year and they want to come full circle. I mean, there's nothing better than that. So
An amazing way to find your passion, just jumping in and seeing it around you and realizing like this is what I'm passionate about, not law school. So
yeah.
very, very cool story. But let's talk a little bit about how you balance this great mission and the financial responsibility with it. You obviously still have payroll to pay. You still have
Mhm.
operational realities. You said you're helping some people with different certifications so that they can pursue their passions also within the different groups that you have set up. What kind of lessons have you learned about aligning the financial sustainability with the heart-centered care?
Yes. So investing in your staff first, right? What we've noticed is as long as we can perseverate on, getting denials from insurance companies and, not getting these grants or whatever it might be and not sleep at night. I mean, at the end of the day, there are a lot of politics involved. It's a saturated market. So there's a rehab on every corner. We are completely aware of that. And again, going back to what I was saying before is we could be bogged down by this competitive notion that we have to be number one, or we can really look at the system as a whole and say, listen, we've got good in-house talent. We're not going to force anyone to do a training that they're not comfortable with because we want to look different on the website, right? So what I love about the business and the clinical side of things is that we collaborate and we don't just Google and say, well, this program doesn't have that, so let's do this thing. What we do is, again, we survey our staff and we say, okay, what are you comfortable with? The other piece is we don't want to fall into any unfortunate stereotype, which some agencies do is they, in essence, maybe sometimes take advantage of interns and treat them like staff. And that's something that, even politically, it doesn't sit right with me. And it happened to me many, many moons ago where, free labor and this is free help and we'll just bleed them dry. And, I would hope most of my interns that have ever worked with me understand that I try to completely go the opposite there because I want to retire happy someday. And if these interns don't like the work, then I'm not going to retire. So selfishly, it's kind of part of that is, I don't want to burn them out before they've even graduated, right? So what we do is we take advantage in a healthy way of what do you want out of this experience? And I know I've had some interns sit in front of me and go, that's a loaded question. My teacher said, and I think I'm supposed to, and no. What do you want out of this? And so when they sit and they observe groups and they realize, well, I could probably do that for about an hour, or I could probably execute that lesson plan or that treatment plan. And the conversations just keep flowing. So with that being said, I survey the talent. And then we offer workshops that are free to the community. Simple registration process, obviously consent and HIPAA and confidentiality is all addressed, but we don't say like, listen, that will be this copay or we're going to run your insurance. That's for our admitted clients in a very formal way. But when the community starts to see that, on our Facebook pages and in social media that we start to advertise, free workshops and the ability to say like, listen, just come in, we'll get your name, we'll get your number. So surveying and fostering, the intern talent, but within reason and making sure they don't feel too pressured. I think is huge. So with the community involvement, we are very transparent. We say like, listen, this is intern led. This is community led. I have a lot of friends I went to grad school with that let's say work in the school system and they've kind of had it with kids, but they want to come and run one group. It's just a favor to me. So this small, we call them the little ancillary community. They come in because they just want to keep their fire lit in regards to mental health, but not necessarily feel too burnt out with the population they work with, 40 hours a week. So I have friends I've known for 20 years that come in and they do a women's workshop or they do a holistic type of approach. And we've created this system where because I have these volunteers and these free workshops, not only does it lighten the load for my counselors to be able to do kind of the rough and tumble stuff, but it allows for diversity in our programming. So with that being said, if we get enough community engagement that come to these free workshops, and then afterwards they come to me and they say, well, what else do you guys do here? And what we've noticed is that these relationships that we built with outside agencies, we focus not just on the marketing end, but just on resource development. And so if it's for just case management or social services for aftercare planning, a lot of times we've had conversations about, hey, we'll just send someone who graduated from our program to you for this support group or something like, a service that you provide. And then they're calling us 2 minutes later saying, well, I actually have someone I'd like to send to you. So it's very organic. It's not kind of sales pitchy. Is that part of it to a degree? Of course. But what we've noticed is relationships and offering free workshops, as scary as that might be for some agencies where we're not bringing in any income and that's manpower. Well, the interns get to learn. They're already here, and it's not some in-depth psychotherapy group. So it's not, kind of shaking up licensing regulations or anything. It's all voluntary. And if out of the 10 people that showed up to your free workshop, let's say for educators that are burnt out, one of them calls you back and says, my uncle or my uncle Marty wants to admit to your program, then we've done our job. Right? So it's exposure through free workshops and free events. It's empowering the interns that are not on payroll anyway. And again, not taking advantage and not overloading anyone, but there's these little pockets where we can be very frugal while also engaging with our staff and empowering them to do great things.
Yeah, going in there and really optimizing how you're working with these interns and building out community events is a wonderful system that you have built up, and it allows for interns to really explore different areas that they may become interested in, and probably helps foster some new relationships as you hire as well. That's wonderful. Awesome. So looking ahead, what kind of trends or opportunities do you see emerging in the mental health space that organizations should be preparing for?
So I would say, as raw as it is, political fatigue, no matter what side you're on, if you're on a side at all, it's not hard to see that it's impacting the world we live in a very immediate way and covering a lot of bases. So when before maybe it was a bit more narrowed, oh, I just won't vote for this person, or I just won't pay attention to this particular topic. Now it's vast. Right. So, and it's creating a lot of relational discords within families. So the family therapy realm, I'm biased as a family therapist, but I've noticed that a big portion of the sessions that we're accommodating are, yes, about the loved one, but again, as they come forward with their identities and embracing who they are and recognizing that it's a reintroduction, right? It's mom, dad, spouse, this is who I am. Now that I'm of clear mind, I don't agree with you. And I don't agree with where the world is going. And I don't feel safe in your home emotionally. And I don't feel safe in this world if I don't embrace this piece or go to this support network or follow this fellowship. So that reintroduction in regards to identity and how it's kind of playing into society right now, and where we are far more open to hearing people's stories and accepting where they're at and kind of learning about how people are embracing who they are as people. We're also in a world now where there's some kind of archaic fears that maybe we haven't felt in a long time. And it's navigating that of, should I be proud of this? Should I be scared of this? Should I be afraid of this? So that's a big piece of it. I do think gaming addiction and internet addiction is going to almost, hate to jinx it, kind of take over kind of the traditional addictions that we're seeing now with legalization of marijuana, in the last 10 years, and dispensaries on every corner, and, all of this kind of flipping of stigmas of, well, this drug meant this, and now no one's even, drinking like they used to because they're taking infused drinks and gummies and all of these things. So that dynamic has kind of shifted the traditional substance addiction model, which, pros and cons to that. There's just going to be continued learning and exposure there. But the internet and the gaming piece, especially with adolescents, I think is going to be huge, because these COVID kids, as we call them, the socialization skills, the things that were kind of barriers in their upbringing, if they're in junior high school now, they were in kindergarten and elementary when that happened. And so these core developmental things that they were robbed of by no fault of their own are now kind of catching up. And that accessibility to socializing via your phone or via Roblox or whatever it might be. I mean, it's not how it used to be where, I have a 12-year-old, for example, and I was so excited when he asked me to drive him to the yogurt shop to meet with his friends yesterday. I said, I will drive you to the moon, right? I would love that, because take the phone out of your hand and just go eat ice cream with your friends, right? But, that dynamic is kind of exasperated by, well, it's all right here. And so really making sure that, kids aren't going down rabbit holes, adolescents, young teens, young 20s, and that socialization piece is reintroduced and we revive it, because we're recovering from the COVID era. And it's important that we make some steps that are far more formal to recognize that there were some ramifications with that maybe we weren't really willing to address. And now we're kind of cleaning up that mess. So
yeah, you hit on some really, really great points. I have 2 COVID kids myself, so we talk not all the time, but pretty frequently about, what the dopamine hit that you get when you're looking on your phone and you're scrolling, and the different impacts that happen mentally when you post something and you get a like, or or you're even just scrolling through and seeing someone else's perspective that's just a tiny flash of what they wanted you to see instead of the whole perspective of their lives. It's a scary time, I think, when it comes to to some of that stuff. I don't think we fully understand the impact of it yet. So I agree with you. It's something that definitely needs to be addressed for the future. And we are also, like you said, in a time where we're so divided politically that we have a lot more conflict often within families. And it's become a major stressor for a lot of people, and it's divided a lot of families to the point of like no contact, which is it's sad that, like you said, we've regressed some in these different fears that are coming up that are being perpetuated with some of the stuff that's out there. So very, very good key points. And I appreciate your perspective because you know what's going on. So let's talk a little bit about your growth for Mental Health Peak. What are you, look ahead 12 months, what's the biggest opportunity that you see for expansion and being able to help more individuals? Is it like digital visibility, referral network expansion, community engagement, operational efficiencies, team capacity? What are you looking, like what's your kind of focus for the next 12 months to get, continue to help more people?
Yes. So again, we are opening in a third location in Northern Jersey, right outside of New York City. So definitely addressing the geographic needs. If you're familiar with New Jersey, I mean, I don't even live in New Jersey. I live in the Philadelphia area, but, I'm still learning. But what I have noticed is, North Jersey and South Jersey are like two different states. You've got kind of the Jersey Shore beachgoers, and then you've got the New York, metro city dwellers, right? So the dynamics and the stressors that come with those two types of, because you've got a lot of hospitality jobs in South Jersey, Atlantic City, that sort of thing. So the stressors of gambling addiction. So I think really addressing geographic stressors and kind of where people are being exposed to certain things and how families are being divided in regards to commutes and financial stress. And, again, going back to kind of inflation and all of that. So families and relocations and people taking on third jobs and, really just trying to kind of maintain just some normalcy amongst a lot of things that are barriers beyond their control. So I think making sure that we have brick and mortar locations in these hot spots is going to be huge for us. And then that virtual component, right? So making sure that we maintain compliance in the sense that, for example, again, like I live in Pennsylvania, when it comes to licensing and being able to kind of cross the border into what we can serve, we have, for example, people that they have legal charges and they can't travel. They don't have their driver's license. So having virtual availability to say, listen, you can still attend our program virtually and, live in Philadelphia. We don't want you to risk your safety, any kind of legal ramifications because you feel like you have to be right here. So definitely on a technological level, having smart boards in every group room and having, a business, telehealth account and making sure that we can do consents digitally so that it kind of streamlines this need. Because a lot of times, like let's say the family court system is like, I want you to go to treatment tomorrow. And these folks are scrambling with, what is treatment? Where do I call? What do I do? And the idea of being able to kind of streamline that where we give you a patient portal, you log in, you fill out all the paperwork so that you can just be logged in for group the day after and meet with your counselor. And all this noise is kind of lessened a bit because we notice a lot of that, again, that kind of archaic way of looking at things. We have to come in and sign your consents and we have to give you a tour. Even it's something as simple as having, a drone kind of do a tour of your agency and have that video on your website to say, listen, this is your home. This is where your peers are going to be meeting with you. This is where you're going to be digitally sitting in group and, your counselor's office, for example. So really kind of understanding the nature of where we are in 2026, but also remembering that people want to feel safe and heard and that, robots aren't doing therapy yet, thank goodness, right? So there are humans behind that and having, again, just that transparency of our staff. This is my background. This is why I got into this field. No secrecy, right? Just making sure that I hire staff that are willing, within reason, again, to say, this is why I do the work that I do. This is my background. These are some areas that I tend to do better at, and these are the modalities I use. If you're not comfortable with that, I have a colleague that also, I do a lot of collaborative work. So I'll do family and trauma work for counselors where their scope is more recovery based. And if we kind of tag team that way, we've noticed that the client feels far more secure in the sense, so I don't have to go to all these different providers. No, we do it all in-house, but we don't want anyone meeting with you that is working outside their scope because of the pressures of, again, insurance billing and the politics of it all. So we make sure in-house, there's a lot of areas that are addressed. People feel comfortable in what they're doing. So again, that's a big part of our plan is to make sure we have this diverse staffing and approach that, kind of caters to different types of backgrounds, whether it be working professionals, adolescents, and everyone kind of feels like there's communities within communities and that they don't have to outsource everything, which is our case manager's job when they graduate, right? We're here with your
Right.
aftercare plan. This is what you're supposed to do. You don't have to stress about all of that right here. So, for example, if I have a client that, might be a little intimidated by having a younger counselor, this person's not going to understand. They don't have kids, they don't have family, and that's okay, right? When I was a young family therapist and I didn't have kids, I would always say I could have a million kids. They're not your kids, but I'll meet you where you're at, right? And what it
Mm-hmm.
allows for is, well, you're going to meet with this person who is, centered in this modality and has this type of lifestyle experience. And then you're going to meet with your counselor about kind of the present stuff, which is coping mechanisms. And you don't have to feel like you have to switch around and do all of these things, where having this kind of community model should make you feel safe, right? So it's really just expanding, again, the geography of it all, understanding the
Mm-hmm.
structures of our environments, telehealth component, and having a diverse staff that isn't kind of one-sided. We only do CBT here,
Right.
and we only serve this type of demographic. And if you are outside of that, we get scared and insecure, and we don't like that. So again, that humility piece with our staff is huge too, is I don't know
Right.
that. I don't do grief work. I don't do trauma work. We're not going to force you to do it, but this person can. You do this part.
Perfect. Yeah. So when you're looking at those different components that you just outlined, what do you see as the biggest bottleneck with any of those, with the building the new location or the telehealth expansion or expanding online? Like, what's your biggest bottleneck that you kind of see in the next 12 months? Or maybe there's not one. Maybe you
I
got it
mean,
all figured out.
do not out. I'm optimistic, but not outrageously so. I definitely think, again, going back to that saturated market,
Mm,
what people are defining as addiction, I think is a big one too. What people are defining as chronic acute mental health. I think sometimes it can be, for example, if there are programs that are more harm reduction versus abstinent based, there's kind of that debate in the field of, no drugs, period. And well, this is for maintenance, so what I've noticed is that's been kind of the more on the ground bottleneck issue is, okay, well, if you want to kind of lift the veil here, but not here, so we try to be as liberal as we can in regards to meeting people where they're at again. But we have noticed that that's kind of the great debate is what's medicine, what's healing, go over here and you can do all these things, just not this one thing, or go over here and you can't do anything ever. Right. So, I think again, it can get a little combative there amongst peers and colleagues in the community of, are we harming or, helping these clients? And, that's kind of more of an internal debate amongst our businesses. But I've noticed that that's kind of, and again, it goes back to what people are willing to compromise to stick out. And I do my best every day to kind of have a lens on that of no matter what, we're not compromising A, B, C, and D, because at the end of the day, I will happily retire and be a florist tomorrow. Always wanted to be one, right? If there's a cure tomorrow for all of this, I will step away, right? But if it ever gets to a point where I feel like, well, I'm not comfortable executing this modality or executing this type of programming, but it will make us a couple of bucks, then it's time for me to go elsewhere, right? So I think that's it, is kind of just not being drowned out by the noise and the debates of what illness is and what recovery is.
right. Great. Very well put. I did read an article. This had to be at least several months ago, maybe 6 months, might have been a year, about the meditative therapy of putting flower arrangements together and how doing that can be a very peaceful and therapeutic experience. So maybe maybe you should do a class on it.
I would happily do that. I'll tie it in.
Okay, so as we close out, what kind of lessons have you learned along the way that you'd like to share with other clinicians or leaders who want to build something similar? Like, what would you tell someone that's stepping into this executive leadership role or just starting a behavioral therapy or behavioral health facility of some kind?
So I think the number one thing, and anyone who knows me knows I kind of harp on this a lot, but is education and training is something to be completely proud of and continue it, right? But having fancy titles and the alphabet behind your name isn't your identity. It isn't you as a whole person. And again, that kind of goes back to just how I practice in general with my clients. I practice the same as I'm very proud of my accomplishments. But what I've noticed is when I have, past colleagues that kind of made that it, right? This has to be, I spent all this money, I have all these student loans, and I graduated, and that's wonderful. Are you a good person? Are you doing this for the right reasons? Do you have good intentions? Because if you just want to have a fancy leather chair and put your feet on top of the desk and go, look at all these, framed certificates on my wall, how awesome am I? Then you're in the wrong field. And I would hope that no one in any field would be that pretentious, right? So I would say anyone that's going into it, and again, you don't also have to be Mother Teresa either. You don't have to be completely, humble to a point where you're a doormat. Not that she was a doormat, but, you don't want to compromise everything, especially financial security, to just be, again, that bleeding heart, but just that really happy medium of remember where you came from. If you ever feel like your intentions or motives are shifting in any kind of negative way, maybe perhaps due to financial stress or to keep up with what's going on in the field, then check in with yourself. Peer consultation is huge, making sure that you have other colleagues that are kind of doing the same, and that you call each other, maybe a monthly Zoom, whatever it might be of, are you feeling a little icky? I'm feeling a little icky, right? And again, just making sure we can be human with one another without losing the faith of our staff and our team. So I would say definitely continue your education, stay curious. If you stop staying curious, then that's a problem too. And then always just be kind of open to not, again, compromising what you're comfortable with, but being open to the fact that the field is changing. Had you asked me 10 years ago if marijuana would be legal and there'd be dispensaries on every street corner, I'd be like, you're ridiculous. That's where Target goes and the dry cleaner. No, now you go to Target here and then the dry cleaner. So I had to adapt, and it didn't shift my personal morals or my beliefs, but I had to understand that this is the world we live in now. How do I work around it and still help people? So there has to be adaptability. There has to be humility and, again, curiosity. And if you can't breathe life into those, again, maybe it's time to look into the floral arts or something else.
Well said. Very, very well said. What I really love about this conversation that we've had is I think it shows that mental health care doesn't scale by accident. It scales through these intentional systems that you've set up, your leadership clarity, your community design. You're leading with such a strong passion and really leading with empathy for others. You've created something very beautiful here. So congratulations. I think I really enjoyed speaking with you. You have an amazing program set up. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the work that you're doing in this space. I hope you don't become a florist. Well, I mean, unless everything is cured immediately, I hope you don't become a florist soon. Or at least you stay tied into this on the side, maybe.
Yes,
so
of course.
For those who want to learn a little bit more about Mental Health Peak and are maybe in the area, what's the best place for them to connect with you, like your website, so we can put it on the show notes?
Yes. So we have multiple websites that are kind of under the same LLC, but
Okay.
mhpeak.com, that would be the number one. You'll see kind of, we're all over Facebook and Instagram. I would say Facebook's kind of the best. We have Clear Direction Recovery Center. That's in Marlton, New Jersey. Again, same complex. And then Peak Mental Health is in Suite D. Clear is in Suite A. And then we will be opening up Holgate Mental Health, which is in Mount Vale, New Jersey, again, right outside of New York City, hopefully late spring. So we're all kind of, again, under the same LLC. A lot of collaboration in regards to, I have a counselor right now who got an apartment up north and she's moving up there. And so we make sure we kind of plant everyone where they need to be, and it all kind of started in one spot. We're not starting fresh. We bring more people in, but we kind of have these, we call them, OGs, kind of planted at all of the locations. And that, again, allows for us to feel safe as business owners to say, listen, they know how we run things. They know what our beliefs and our morals are. They're just going to take them over here. So that would be huge. And find us on Facebook and then at our direct websites. And if you want to reach out to me, that's fine too.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thanks again, Natasha. And to our audience, remember that growth doesn't dilute impact when the right infrastructure is in place to support it. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to like and subscribe for more practice-focused insights and conversations with leaders that are shaping the future of wellness. We will see you next time on The Practice Pulse.